The war had been burning for 100 years when High Warlord Kethnar received the report, and he did not look up from his tactical display when it was delivered. This was intentional. Kethnar had commanded the Vathari Empire's war machine for 63 of those 100 years, and in that time he had developed a precise vocabulary of physical gestures that communicated to subordinates exactly how much of his attention they deserved. Looking up meant something mattered. Not looking up meant it didn't. The habit had served him well for 6 decades. He was studying the morning's bombardment reports when Censor Officer Yethra spoke. "Warlord, I'm reading a fleet emergence in the Selvari corridor. Multiple contacts." "Keth forces." "No, sir, the transponders are a pause. Human, sir." Kethnar moved a marker on his tactical display. "How many ships?" "Still counting, Warlord. The emergence is large." "Notify me when something relevant happens." He picked up his ceremonial drinking vessel, a thing of black Vathari iron that had sat on his command table for 40 years, and took a measured sip. "Send a border patrol to assess. Standard protocol." He did not look up. 47 hours and 23 minutes later, the war was over. Not paused, not suspended pending negotiation, not reduced to a ceasefire that would collapse inside a decade the way ceasefires always did in the Selvari corridor. Over. Completely, permanently, irrevocably over. Two civilizations that had been killing each other since before any currently serving officer on either side had been born set down their weapons, because the alternative had been made very clear to them by a species they had not, until approximately 45 hours into those 47, taken seriously. This is the account of those hours, what led to them, and what happened inside them, and what the galaxy understood differently on the other side of them. It begins, as the most important things often do, not with a battle but with a loss. 6 months before the Selvari corridor, a colony ship named the Meridian was crossing through disputed space on a route that 3 separate navigational authorities had certified as clear of active combat operations. The Meridian was a civilian vessel. A large one, as colony ships went, carrying 2,847 people toward a new settlement on a planet called Ilara's Hope, which was an optimistic name for a world with thin atmosphere and difficult soil, and the particular stubborn promise of a place that humans had decided was worth building something on. The 2,847 people aboard included families, construction workers, agricultural specialists, teachers, a full medical team led by a young woman named Dr. Priya Vasquez, who had deferred a residency position at Earth's most prestigious xenobiology institute to come on this mission, because she believed, sincerely and without irony, that the frontier colonies needed doctors more than the core worlds did. And one passenger who had not been assigned to the mission, but had pulled strings to get a berth because a 23-day crossing was a long time, and his father had not seen him in 8 months. Marcus Kovacs was 19 years old. He was in his 2nd year of medical school. He had his mother's eyes and his father's jaw, and a particular quality that people who met him noticed and struggled to articulate, which was simply that he listened to people when they talked completely, without constructing his response while they were still speaking. His professors said he was going to be extraordinary. His friends said he was the kind of person you called at 2 in the morning when things had gone wrong, and he always answered. He was 3 days from Ilara's Hope, when the Vathari and Keth fleets engaged each other in the navigation corridor that 3 separate authorities had certified as clear. The Meridian's distress signal lasted 41 seconds before the ship was caught in a cascading weapons exchange that neither side had aimed at it, and neither side stopped to account for. Nobody on either side sent a communication to Earth. Nobody filed an incident report with the Galactic Compact. Nobody said anything at all, because in a 100-year war, a civilian ship in the wrong place at the wrong time was not news. It was arithmetic. Admiral James Kovacs received the notification in his quarters aboard the UES Ironclad at 3:40 hours. His aide, Lieutenant Farsi, delivered it personally because some notifications should not arrive on a screen. He was standing at his desk when she told him. He was holding a coffee cup in each hand because he had been about to offer her one. She told him, and he stood there for a long time with both cups, and he didn't put them down. She didn't know what to do, so she waited. The cups steamed. He stood there. Eventually, he set them down on the desk very carefully, both of them, side by side. He thanked her. He told her that was all. She left. She stood outside his door for a moment afterward, listening, but there was no sound from inside. He did not come out of his quarters for 4 hours. When he emerged, his uniform was pressed and his face was entirely composed, and if anyone on his senior staff noticed that something in his eyes had changed permanently, they had the wisdom not to say so. Humanity's formal response to the Meridian incident went through proper channels, which was what humanity did when something terrible happened. The United Earth Council filed a joint demand with both the Vathari Empire and the Keth Dominion. The demand was specific: acknowledge the incident, accept accountability for the loss of civilian life, provide reparations to the families of the 2,847 dead, commit to navigational safety protocols that would prevent recurrence. It was a reasonable demand. It was the kind of demand that two civilizations who had been at war for 100 years should have found manageable, because it cost them nothing strategically, and asked only for the basic decency of admitting that 2,847 people had died. The Vathari response arrived 17 days later. It was brief. It had been written, Earth's translation team concluded, by someone who was not particularly interested in the task. It said, in the measured diplomatic language that made contempt sound like bureaucracy, the Vathari Empire acknowledges receipt of your communication regarding the navigation incident in Selvari Corridor. We note that the area was designated as an active conflict zone by standard Vathari Keth engagement protocols, and that civilian vessels entering such zones do so at their own risk. The loss of life is regrettable. Reparations are not applicable in cases of navigational negligence by the affected vessel. The Vathari Empire considers this matter closed. A translation footnote at the bottom, added by Earth's chief xenolinguist, noted that the phrase used for regrettable in the original Vathari text was a term more precisely translated as noted without consequence, a formality used when recording events of no significance. The Keth Dominion did not respond at all. 30 days of silence. Earth sent follow-up communications. 30 days became 45, became 60. The Galactic Compact's Dispute Resolution Office acknowledged receipt of humanity's complaint and estimated a review timeline of 8 to 14 months. Admiral James Kovacs read every one of these communications. He read the Vathari response 6 times. He read the translation footnote on the 7th reading, and then he set the document down and looked out the viewport of his quarters on the ironclad at the stars for a very long time. Then he made a request to Earth Command that was either very simple or very complicated depending on how you thought about it. He asked for the 7th Fleet, independent operational authority, and 48 hours. The United Earth Council debated this for 11 hours. There were voices that said it was disproportionate, voices that said it was reckless, voices that said two civilizations, both actively engaged in a century of warfare, were not an appropriate target for retaliatory action by a single admiral with a single fleet. General Amara Walsh, Earth's senior military commander, listened to all of these voices carefully. Then she looked at the proposal Kovacs had submitted, which was not a plan for retaliation exactly. It was a plan for conclusion. She asked Kovacs to appear before the council by comm link. He appeared. He was standing, not sitting. His uniform had no decoration on it except his rank insignia, and one thing Walsh had not seen him wear before: a small photograph clipped to his left breast pocket, the kind of old-fashioned physical print that nobody made anymore, showing a young man in a medical school jacket squinting into the sun and laughing at something off-camera. The council asked him questions for 40 minutes. He answered each one completely and without impatience. When they asked him how he could be confident in the plan's operational timeline, he said that they had been watching the Vathariketh War for 100 years, and he had spent 3 of those years ensuring that watching translated into knowing. When they asked him what he meant by knowing, he told them. The room was quiet for a while after that. General Walsh called for the vote before anyone could change their minds. What Admiral Kovacs had told the council was this. For 3 years, working within a classified program that reported to General Walsh and to nobody else, a team of 217 analysts, engineers, and intelligence specialists had been doing something that neither the Vathari Empire nor the Keth Dominion knew was being done. They had been mapping, not the geography of the war, which was publicly documented in the Galactic Compact's records, the infrastructure of it, every supply depot, every command station, every fleet staging area, every navigational pattern, every predictable rotation of every patrol fleet across both civilizations. They had done this through a combination of methods, some of which were technically creative, and some of which were simply patient. The Selvari corridor was a heavily trafficked region. Both sides moved ships through it constantly. Ships emitted signals. Signals could be read by observers who had nothing better to do than read them for 3 years and build a picture from them, detail by detail, until the picture was complete. The picture, when complete, showed something that no external observer of the Vathariketh War had fully appreciated before, because external observers tended to see the war as 2 roughly equivalent powers in a mutually exhausting stalemate. What the picture showed was not equivalence. It showed interdependence. Both civilizations had oriented their entire military logistics infrastructure around the assumption that the other side would behave in predictable doctrinal ways, because after 100 years, both sides knew exactly what the other would do in any given situation. The war had become a system, and like all systems, it had points where the removal of a single element would cascade into collapse. Kovacs had identified those points. He had identified them for both sides simultaneously, and for 3 years he had built a fleet specifically designed to reach them all within a single operational window. He called it the Hammer Fleet, not officially. Officially it was classified Naval Reserve Formation 7, but the name the teams used was Hammer because Kovacs had said once, in a briefing that was not recorded, that when you'd spent 3 years finding exactly the right place to hit something, what you needed at the end of it was not a scalpel. 212 ships, not the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled, optimized instead for speed and simultaneous reach, built to be in multiple places at the same moment, hitting multiple targets before either side could coordinate a response. They had been positioned in the Selvari corridor for 11 days before the morning Kethnar's censor officer delivered his report. They had been there, silent and dark and waiting, while Kethnar read his bombardment reports and did not look up. Commander Yethsal had served under High Warlord Kethnar for 9 years and had learned in that time when to push and when to wait. He pushed rarely. He pushed now. Warlord. He stepped onto the command platform, which protocol required a request to do. He did not request. I have the full count on the human emergence. Kethnar looked up, not because Yethsal had stepped without permission, though he noted it, because Yethsal's voice had something in it that it didn't usually have. 212 ships. Yethsal placed the report on the tactical display, positioned across 7 points in the Selvari corridor simultaneously. Warlord, they didn't arrive sequentially. They emerged all at once from 7 separate coordinates in a coordinated pattern that required. He stopped. The navigational precision required to do this is not supposed to be within human capability. What is your point, Commander? My point is that our intelligence on their positions indicates they've been there for 11 days. Silent, dark, undetected. Yethsal met his commanding officer's eyes, which was another thing one generally did not do with Kethnar. Sir, human intelligence on our positions is too accurate. They know our supply chain schedules. They know our patrol rotation windows. They know things they should not know unless they have been. Watching, Kethnar said. Yes, sir. Then they've been watching. Kethnar looked at the report for a moment, then he pushed it aside. Good. Let them watch what happens next. Send the 2nd Border Division to intercept. Standard engagement protocol. Sir, I don't think. That will be all, Commander. Yethsal stood at the command platform for exactly 1 second longer than was appropriate. Then he went back to his station and began, very quietly, preparing his personal emergency evacuation protocols. He had served under Kethnar for 9 years. He knew how this worked. He knew what always happened when Kethnar decided something wasn't relevant. He had just never been on the wrong side of it before. The communication arrived on both the Vathari command network and the Keth Dominion's fleet relay simultaneously, at exactly the same moment, which was itself a technical achievement that both civilizations' communications officers would spend considerable time afterward trying to understand. It was a simple transmission, audio only in the common trade language, with auto-translation enabled for all registered compact members. It said, "This is Admiral James Kovacs of the United Earth Navy, commanding the Hammer Fleet, currently positioned in the Selvari Corridor. I am addressing both the Vathari Empire and the Keth Dominion simultaneously, because this message applies equally to both. 6 months ago, your war killed 2,847 civilians aboard the colony ship Meridian. Among them was a 19-year-old medical student named Marcus Kovacs. The Vathari Empire told us the matter was closed. The Keth Dominion said nothing at all. I am giving you 24 hours to transmit formal acknowledgement of responsibility for the Meridian incident, a complete cessation of hostilities in the Selvari Corridor, and commitment to reparations negotiations for all civilian losses attributable to your conflict. If you do not, I will demonstrate why you should have responded differently 60 days ago. You have 24 hours. The message ended. On the Vathari command station, a communications officer looked at the relay indicator showing that the identical message had been received by the Keth Dominion command fleet. She looked at her supervisor. Her supervisor looked at his superior. The question moved up the chain in about 40 seconds. Kethnar heard it at the top of the chain and called it charming. On the Keth Dominion's fleet command ship, Grand Admiral Vortek received the transmission and then received from his intelligence chief a report that his intelligence chief had been trying to get into a briefing for 6 weeks, but that Vortek had classified as lower priority than 17 other things. He read the report now. He read it carefully. He read it a second time less carefully because the second reading was really about verifying that the first reading had said what he thought it said. Intelligence Chief Saul, a thin Keth officer who had been in intelligence work for 31 years and had the permanently tired expression of someone who spent their career knowing things that people in authority didn't want to hear, watched him read. When Vortek looked up, Saul said, "I've been trying to brief you on this for 6 weeks, Admiral. This is 3 years of data." "Yes, sir. 3 years of systematic observation of our navigational patterns, our supply schedules, our fleet positioning, our patrol rotation windows, our command infrastructure, all of it." Saul clasped his hands behind his back. "They know where everything is, sir. Not approximately, precisely." Vortek looked at his tactical display. At the 212 contacts in the Selvari Corridor, and the 7 simultaneous emergence points, and the 24 hours that were now 23 hours and 48 minutes. "Why didn't you escalate this further when I deprioritized the briefing?" "I did, sir, 3 times. Saul's voice was the voice of someone who had learned not to say "I told you so" out loud, but who communicated it perfectly through careful tonal restraint. "I was told it was speculative." Vortek was quiet for a moment. He looked at the contacts again. He opened a private channel to the Vathari command station. "Kethnar," he said. When the High Warlord appeared on his screen, "I think we should discuss the humans." Kethnar's expression suggested he found this mildly more interesting than usual. "I've been sending a division to intercept them. With respect, I'd recommend recalling it." A pause. You're concerned. I've just been briefed on something I should have been briefed on 6 weeks ago, Vortex said. The humans have been mapping us, both of us, comprehensively. Mapping us. Every supply depot, every command station, every patrol pattern. A pause. Admiral Kethnar, they know where to hit us, both of us, simultaneously. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a very experienced military commander, recalculating something he had thought was already calculated. You're suggesting, Kethnar said slowly, that we respond to their ultimatum. I'm suggesting we take 20 minutes to review the intelligence before we decide. 20 minutes, Kethnar repeated. Something in his tone made Yethsal across the bridge look up from his station. A species that has been in space for 40 years, commanding a fleet we didn't know existed, watched our war from the outside for 3 years, and you want 20 minutes. He looked at the transmission record of Kovacs' message on his display. Find out everything we can about this Admiral Kovacs. Immediately. His son was on the Meridian, Yethsal said quietly from across the bridge. Kethnar turned to look at him. Marcus Kovacs, he mentioned it in the transmission, 19 years old, medical student. Yethsal did not look away. I looked it up when the message came in, sir. He had him 3 days out from his destination when the crossfire hit. The bridge was quiet. Kethnar turned back to his display. He looked at the 212 contacts for a long time. Send the response, he said finally. Tell them we need more than 24 hours for a decision of this magnitude. Yethsal began composing the message. Then he stopped. Sir, should I also recall the border division you sent to intercept? Kethnar thought for a moment. Yes, he said, recall them. It was the right decision, and it was also 11 minutes too late. The border division had been moving for 20 minutes and had entered the engagement envelope that Reyes had plotted 18 hours ago, and what happened to it in the next 4 minutes was going to make the next 23 hours of the deadline entirely irrelevant. Lieutenant Commander Alina Reyes was 26 years into her life and had been running tactical calculations for the last 9 of them, and she had never in those 9 years encountered a targeting solution as clean as the one currently on her board. The Vathari border division was 8 ships. They were moving in standard intercept formation, which Reyes had known they would do because standard intercept formation was what Vathari doctrine specified for this scenario, and she had read Vathari doctrine the way some people read novels, with genuine enjoyment of the craft. Admiral, she said, the border division is in the engagement envelope. Kovacs, at the command position at the center of the ironclad's bridge, looked at the tactical display. 8 contacts, moving in the expected formation at the expected speed, along the expected vector. He had known they were coming. He had expected them. He had, when composing the 24-hour ultimatum, factored in that Kethnar would send something immediately regardless of the deadline, because Kethnar had been commanding the Vathari war machine for 63 years, and sending something immediately was reflex. Non-lethal engagement, he said. Drives and weapons, leave the crews intact. Reyes said aye, and her hands moved across the targeting board. And what happened to 8 ships in the next 6 minutes was what happened when a targeting system built from 3 years of intelligence, data, engaged vessels whose every technical specification had been comprehensively mapped, and who had no corresponding intelligence on what they were facing. The 8 ships were disabled, not destroyed. Their drives were gone and their weapons were offline and they were drifting, crewed, no immediate danger to their personnel, and entirely unable to do anything except watch what came next. Kovacs looked at the result on his display. He did not smile, he noted it. Bo, he said, opening the channel to engineering. Chief Engineer Bo Washington's voice came back immediately, which meant he'd been monitoring the engagement. Admiral. How are we looking? Clean. Everything ran exactly the way it was supposed to run, which means either we built this right or the universe is in a good mood, and I don't trust the universe's moods. A brief pause. Port lateral cannon is running 2 degrees warm. Not a problem. I'm watching it. Watch it. That's what I said I was doing, sir. Reyes, not looking up from her board, said, He's going to tell you to watch it again. Watch it, Bo, Kovacs said. Watching it, Washington confirmed. The communication from Kethnar, requesting an extension of the deadline, arrived 47 minutes after the border division had been disabled. Kovacs read it. He noted the timing. He understood what the timing meant. The request for more time had been composed before Kethnar knew about the border division, which meant Kethnar had been genuinely reconsidering, and now had something additional to reconsider. He opened a channel back to the Vathari command station. Kethnar appeared on screen. He was seated, which was how Vathari warlords received communications, always seated, always presenting the image of someone who was not standing up because there was no reason to stand up for this. His expression was what it always was, composed, commanding, the face of someone who had been the most powerful military authority in the room for 6 decades. But his eyes were doing something they had probably not done in a long time. They were doing math. Admiral Kovacs, Kethnar said, your disabling of our border division was noted. It was intended to be noted. You did not destroy them. I didn't need to destroy them. I needed to demonstrate a capability. The demonstration is complete. A pause. You said 24 hours. I did. Your border division action was inside that window. It was a response to your border division entering my engagement envelope, Kovacs said. The 24-hour window applies to the ultimatum, not to incoming intercept forces. He met Kethnar's eyes on the screen. My terms haven't changed, Warlord. They're the same terms they were when I sent the message. Acknowledge the meridian. Cease hostilities in the corridor. Commit to reparations negotiations. And if we comply, your fleet withdraws. My fleet withdraws. Kethnar was quiet for a moment. You're asking 2 civilizations at war to cease hostilities simultaneously on your timeline. Yes. That's not how wars end. I'm aware of how wars usually end, Kovacs said. That's why I'm ending this one differently. Kethnar looked at him. The math behind his eyes was still running. What is to prevent us from complying today and resuming conflict after your fleet has withdrawn? Nothing, Kovacs said, except that 3 years from now, if that happens, I'll know exactly where everything is again because I'll have kept watching, and the fleet I bring the second time will not be limited to 212 ships. He let that settle. But I don't think that will happen, Warlord, because you're going to comply today not because you're afraid of me. You're going to comply because you've been fighting this war for 100 years, and you're going to spend tonight looking at what I did to 8 of your ships in 6 minutes, and you're going to do the math, and the math is going to tell you something you haven't had a reason to think about in a very long time. Which is that there's a way for this to be over. Kovacs looked at him steadily. Your channel to Grand Admiral Vortek is still open, by the way. He can hear everything I've said. I left it open on purpose. A brief silence. Then Vortek's voice from the secondary speaker, unexpected and oddly composed. He left it open when he called me also. I've been on this channel for 14 minutes. Kethnar looked, for perhaps the first time in decades, surprised. Kovacs said, I know you've both been considering joining forces against my fleet. The message you exchanged 11 minutes into the deadline went through a relay node we've been reading for 8 months. He watched both of their expressions. I'm telling you now, don't. Not because you couldn't cause damage to my fleet, because in sufficient coordination you might, but because if you force me to demonstrate what this fleet can actually do at full capacity. The negotiation we're having right now will not be available to you afterward. The terms will be different. A pause. These are good terms. Both of you should take them. The channel was quiet for a long time. Then Vortek said something that neither he nor anyone who knew him would have predicted he would say. He said, What was he like? Kovacs was quiet. Your son, what was he like? Kovacs looked at the screen. He thought about this for a moment. He answered the phone, Kovacs said. At 2 in the morning when his friends called, he always answered. Another silence. I will transmit formal acknowledgement of the Meridian incident within the hour, Vortex said, and I will contact the Galactic Compact's Reparations Office to begin the process. A pause. Grand Admiral Vortek, Keth Dominion, signing off. The channel held for another 3 seconds. Then Kethnar said, Vathari Empire, we will comply with your terms, Admiral. Another pause. I want it on record that the Vathari Empire acknowledges the loss of civilian life aboard the Meridian as a consequence of our engagement protocols, that this loss was unacceptable, and that, he stopped, started again, and that the name Marcus Kovacs will be entered into the Vathari record of acknowledged losses, as is appropriate. Kovacs said nothing for a moment. Thank you, Warlord, he said. He closed the channel. The bridge of the ironclad was quiet in the way that bridges go quiet when something significant has finished. Not celebration. The crew of the ironclad were not celebration people. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. Just the particular stillness that comes after something enormous has resolved. Reyes stepped away from her station. She crossed to where Kovacs was standing at the viewport, looking at the stars, at the Selvari corridor, and the 2 disabled fleets drifting in their respective positions, and the 100 years of fire that had just, improbably, stopped. He had one hand in his jacket pocket. She could see the edge of the photograph from where she stood. She didn't say anything. She put her hand on his shoulder and left it there. He didn't say anything either. After a moment, he put his other hand over hers briefly. Then he straightened and turned back to the bridge. Alina, he said, his voice entirely composed. Sir, start drafting the withdrawal coordination. I want both sides to see us pulling back in an orderly sequence. Nothing that looks like retreat, everything that looks like completion. Already started, sir. Bo, he said, to the open engineering channel. Sir, Washington said. How's the port cannon? Temperature is back to nominal, Admiral. I watched it the whole time. Good man. For the record, sir, Washington said, I watched the whole negotiation too. The part where you told them you'd left the channel open and they'd been talking to each other in front of you for 14 minutes. A pause. I want you to know that in 16 years of naval service, that was the finest thing I have ever personally witnessed. File it in the after-action report, Bo. Already did, sir, under the heading Tactical Excellence, with a note in the margin that says actually it was just very funny. Reyes made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Kovacs looked at her. Is that going to be in the official report? Absolutely not, she said. Good. He turned back to the viewport. Outside, the corridor was the same as it had always been: stars, dark space, the faint drift of disabled ships slowly spinning. But something about it was different in the way that places are different after the thing that defined them has ended. The Selvari corridor had been a war zone for 100 years. This morning it was still a war zone. Tonight it was something else. He didn't have a word for what it was yet. He thought he might eventually. The formal cessation of hostilities was transmitted by both the Vathari Empire and the Keth Dominion within 18 hours of Kovacs' ultimatum deadline, which meant it arrived with 6 hours to spare, which Reyes noted in the record with the professional understatement of someone who appreciated margin. The reparations process began 11 days later, initiated through the Galactic Compact's existing framework, which moved considerably faster when both parties were cooperative than when one of them needed to be reminded 7 times. The families of the 2,847 people aboard the Meridian were notified. The process was long and imperfect and inadequate in the way that all reparations are inadequate, because no process can give back what was taken. But it happened. That was not nothing. The Hammer fleet withdrew from the Selvari corridor in a sequence that Reyes had choreographed with the particular care she brought to everything, each ship pulling back in a pattern that looked like what it was. Not retreat, not dispersal, but conclusion. The last thing the sensors on either side saw was the ironclad itself, holding position until every other ship in the fleet had withdrawn, and then turning and moving away at a pace that communicated nothing except that it was going because it was done. Kethnar watched the ironclad's withdrawal on his tactical display. Yethsal stood beside him and did not say anything, because there was nothing useful to say, and he had learned, in 9 years, the difference between moments that required words and moments that did not. "Commander," Kethnar said after a while. "Sorry. That division I sent to intercept, 6 minutes." He looked at the display. 6 minutes, 8 ships, non-lethal engagement. How long have they been capable of that? Yethsal considered how to answer honestly. Based on what the intelligence suggests about their construction timeline, approximately 3 years, sir. 3 years, Kethnar was quiet, and in 3 years they watched us, mapped us, built a fleet specifically to address the weaknesses in our infrastructure, not to destroy us. To end a war we wouldn't stop fighting on our own. He looked at the empty space where the ironclad had been. What kind of people plan for 3 years to end someone else's war? Yethsal thought about the photograph in Kavak's breast pocket, about a young man who answered the phone at 2 in the morning, about the thing that had been in Kavak's voice when he said that. "Motivated once," he said. Kethnar was quiet for a long time. Then, in the 63rd year of his command, High Warlord Kethnar of the Vathari Empire transmitted a formal personal communication to Admiral James Kavaks of the United Earth Navy. It was not long. It was not elegant. He was not a man given to elegance in personal matters. It said, "Admiral Kavaks, we underestimated you. We underestimated your species, your patience, your capability, and your motivation. This was our error. I acknowledge it directly and without qualification." Marcus Kavaks, age 19, medical student. His name is in our record. It will remain there. Kethnar, High Warlord, Vathari Empire. Kavaks read it alone in his quarters. He read it twice. He set it down on the desk next to the photograph, the one of Marcus squinting into the sun and laughing at something off camera. He sat for a while. He didn't write a response. There wasn't a response that was the right size for what he was feeling, and he was a man who had learned not to use words when no words were the right size. Instead, he did something that probably wasn't in any protocol or regulation or official record. He picked up the photograph. He looked at it for a long time in the quiet of his quarters, with the stars outside the viewport and the corridor that had stopped burning somewhere behind him in the dark. Then he put the photograph back in his pocket, stood up, and went back to work. The war that had burned for 100 years ended in 47 hours and 23 minutes. Not because both sides had exhausted themselves. They had been exhausted for decades and had kept fighting. Not because a treaty had been negotiated through proper channels. Proper channels had been tried. Not because a larger power had intervened and imposed terms at the point of overwhelming force. Because one man had lost someone, and had decided that this particular loss was the last one, and had spent 3 years building a very specific hammer for a very specific nail, and had used it with the precision and the restraint of someone who understood the difference between winning a fight and ending one. The Selvari corridor in the years after became something it had not been in anyone's living memory. A transit route. Commerce moved through it. Ships passed in both directions. The navigational certification that had been meaningless when 3 separate authorities had granted it to the meridian became meaningful in a way it had not been before, because the corridor was what it said it was, which was clear. 23 of the reparations cases were settled in the first year. The rest followed. The families received what could be given, which was not what they had lost, because what they had lost could not be given. But something was given and something was acknowledged, and those are not small things. High Warlord Kethnar retired 2 years after the cessation. The official announcement cited age and tenure. Nobody who had been on that bridge said anything publicly about what they had seen in his face when the ironclad withdrew. Grand Admiral Vortek did not retire. He became, improbably, the Keth Dominion's primary diplomatic liaison to the newly established Selvari Corridor Transit Authority, which was a joint body composed of representatives from both civilizations and from Earth. He was not, by nature or training, a diplomatic man. He was, By the accounts of everyone who worked with him in that role, an extremely effective one. He was asked once, in an interview that made it into the Galactic Compact's historical record, what had changed his mind during those 47 hours. He said, "I asked the Admiral what his son was like, and he told me, and I realized that the thing I was looking at was not a military operation, it was a father, and that the fleet and the strategy and the 3 years of preparation were not the thing itself, they were just the way a father who happened to be an admiral expressed the thing itself." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have children. I had been thinking about this as a military problem, with military solutions and military considerations." He changed the framing, and once the framing changed, I could not change it back. He was asked if he thought the Keth Dominion would have done the same, if they had been in humanity's position. He thought about it for a long time. "No," he said, "I don't think we would have. We would have responded with force much sooner and much less precisely. We would have made an example." He looked at something off to the side of the camera. "The humans made a point instead. There's a difference. I didn't understand the difference until I was sitting in it." Admiral James Kovacs was promoted to Fleet Admiral 6 months after the Selvari Corridor. He attended the ceremony in his dress uniform. He gave a brief speech that was focused entirely on his crew and mentioned nothing about himself. He wore the photograph in his breast pocket, as he had every day since he had received the notification on the ironclad. He was asked to speak at the ceremony marking the 1-year anniversary of the cessation. He spoke for 4 minutes. Most of what he said was about the reparations process, about the families, about the work still to be done. At the end, he said one thing that was not about process. He said Marcus wanted to be a doctor. He believed in getting to people in time. I think about that a lot. Whether I got there in time, whether I got there in time for the right things. He paused. I don't have an answer to that, but I think he would have wanted the corridor to be safe. I think he would have wanted the families to be heard. I think he would have answered the phone if any of them had called him. He would have listened. He was good at that. He stepped back from the podium. He did not take questions. Afterward, Reyes found him standing alone at the edge of the ceremony ground, looking at the sky. She stood beside him. Neither of them said anything for a while. Then she said, "He would have been proud of you." Kovacs looked at the sky for another moment. "I know," he said, "that doesn't make it easier." "No," she said, "it doesn't." They stood there for a while, in the particular quiet of after, which is different from any other kind of quiet, and watched the light change, and did not say anything else, because there was nothing else that was the right size. The corridor was safe, the war was over, the work continued. It was not enough, it was also not nothing. That is perhaps the most human thing of all.